SF Symbol 5 is a huge update, and I believe it's one of the most useful ones because of the animations that you can create with it. It's super flexible, it has many types of animations and transitions, and it's super easy to do that in the code. Now we have 5,000 symbols, including 700 new ones, and if you download the app, you're gonna find a new option for play. So this is where you can customize the animation. You can preview it and it works on all the symbols. Now you can select multiple icons and preview the animation. And you have multiple animations such as bounce, scale, variable color. And you can note that it's going to animate by the layer. So if I maximize this and I select bounce, I can see that the layers are animating separately, which makes a more organic animation. So back in Xcode, as we've learned before, we can use any of these symbols without having to import anything. And that also includes for the animation, we don't need to set up anything at all. And here we're gonna go to ellipse, the icon right here, and we're going to apply the animation using a single modifier. So the modifier is going to be symbol effect. And here we have multiple options. Usually, if you're not sure which one to use, start with the one that has the least amount of options, so it's less overwhelming. Now in this case, you can see that options and active is grayed out, which means that you don't have to use it right now. So I'm gonna select this one and type .pulse. So if you remember in SF symbols, we have these preset animations, and essentially the API is going to use the same names, even though it's going to have a difference of, let's say, uppercase, camel case, and sometimes the options are mixed together. So for example, .pulse, but then you can also use .scale, and if you want the up one, it's another dot. Now going back to pulse, you can see that it's starting to animate the icon, and that's it. That's all you needed to do. Now let's go to the magnifying glass, and we're going to use the same symbol effect, and just with one option, .scale, .up. So here you can see that it's only happening once. It's not an animation that is repeating. And this is going to require a state change, which we're going to set up later. For now, we're going to learn about the variable color. So we're going to draw a new icon on top of everything. So we're going to go back to the VStack, which is the entire container here, and double click on the curly braces. And we're going to go at the very end. So we're still within the Z stack, allowing us to set many elements on top of each other. And here I'm going to start with an image, system name, and I'm going to select an icon with the variable color since I'm using the variable color animation. Notice that it's not going to work for just normal icons specific to this animation, of course. So you're going to go to the tab called variable color, and this is where you can find any of these variable color icon which has a progress. So you can see it's turning around like a loading animation, for example, or you have different types of icons with different animations. So let's search for wand, or something a bit magical. And in this case, I'm going to use wand and raise. Selecting variable color, you're going to preview how it's going to look like with different options. These, by the way, are the rendering modes. So if you go to this tab right here, you can change it, or you can just select each of these to see how it's going to look like when you customize the foreground color. Now let's apply the icon wand and raise, and you can see it looks like this right now. Then apply the symbol effect, And again, I'm just going to use the effect, this time using variable color. Now here we have different options. Let me show you. First of all, I'm going to maximize to make it easier to see. So if I preview, this is the default one and it works just the way we set it up. Now, if you want to set it to iterative, then you can see that it's not adding to each other versus here, it's going to keep having this opacity until it finishes versus here, it just switches. Also, you can decide to reverse, meaning that it's going to end here and come back and so on. So again, to customize the options, we're going to add a dot iterative and then dot reversing. And there you go. We have the animation that looks exactly like the one we had in SF symbols. Now we just need to make it bigger and have more icons. To do that, we're going to put this inside an H tag. So right click on it. And then I'm going to set the font. And I'm doing that on the H tag so that I can apply to all of the icons at once. And I'm going to use large title. So now we have something a lot bigger. And then I'm going to add a bit of padding using 20. Then I'm going to set a background using the material, ultra thin material. Then I'm going to copy the outline, so the overlay. And this is what I have. Now make sure to add a corner radius afterwards of 20. And I'm also going to move it up a little bit by using offset, using the Y position minus 44. So let's add more icons, starting with image system name. This time I'm going to set a play.fill and then system name, bell and waves left and right.fill. You definitely want to have more spacing between the icons. So the H tag, just like the V stack, can have a spacing. And I'm going to set it to 30. Great. Now let's take a look at the bounce animation. We're going to use symbol effect again, but this time we're going to have the value as well. Now for the effect, we'll set it to dot bounce. And for the value, for now, we're going to set to 1. Now notice that when I change the value to 2, it's going to activate the animation. So that's what the value is for. Typically, you want to make a value change and then trigger the animation on those events. So we'll have to set up the value change. But first, I want to show you the options. For example, for the one and raise, we can add a comma using options. And here we can set to speed parentheses to 3, for example. And what you're going to notice is that the animation is running a lot faster. And this is an option that is not available in the SF Symbols app. As I mentioned before, typically the code is always going to give you more power, more options to whatever you want to achieve. In this case, we're going to set up states, speed, and different options such as repeating. For example, if you want to change the options for the bell, we're going to have to respect the order of the options. So we have the symbol effect and then the options and then the value. So right before value, we're going to set options and then dot speed 3 and then dot repeating. Now I'm going to also add a comma to make sure that we have the right order. And what you notice is that when I change the value, you can see that it's repeating forever. So it's looping correctly. And if I only want to set to repeat a certain number of time, I can set repeat parentheses 3, and it's going to do it 3 times with a speed of 3 as well. Next, I want to show you that you can customize the foreground style. So for variable color, I'm going to set the foreground style and set to primary. So primary, again, depends on light mode and dark mode. So for example, if I have light mode, it's going to switch to black. So the difference between foreground style and foreground color is that you can actually add multiple values. So in this case, I'm going to add a second value using comma and then dot white. So what's going to happen is that for variable color types of icons, the second color is going to be set to white. So you can see here for the one and the bell, it has a secondary color. Okay, now we're going to work with state changes. And this is going to be useful for things like bounds, but also for the animation called replace. This is used a lot by Apple. So for example, if you click on the play, it should transition to a pause. And typically, if you have, let's say, an editing app, you start editing the text, well, the options for that text is going to change as soon as you select the text or the editing space. So the replace animation is going to be super useful for that. In order to do that, we're going to use a new modifier called content transition, and then dot symbol effect. And here I'm going to use dot replace. So nothing is happening yet. And that's because we need to set a state change. So I'm going to go back at the very top. And this is where I'm going to set my state. If you haven't worked with states yet, this is very useful for animation states or for content changes. So for example, if you click on a button, it's going to change the content, it's going to change the icon, or it's simply going to transition between two animation states. So for example, from a normal screen to a full screen, changing the sizes and so on. So to set that, we're going to set state var is tapped is equal to false by default. And now that we have this state, we're going to set an event. Now, an event can be anything. It can be when you tap an icon, tap a button, or when you change a value, it's going to trigger another change. So that's what states are for, and it's really useful for animations and interactions. Now, I'm going to go to the play icon, and this is where I'm going to make that specific icon to have a gesture event. And I'm going to use untap gesture as a modifier. And now I'm setting my event. So using this, I'm going to use the state called isTap, and I'm going to toggle it. Toggle means that it's going to switch between true and false every time that I tap on it. Right now, it's not doing anything. So what I need to do is to set some sort of a change in the values. So using my state, I'm going to set a condition. Is tapped question mark. I'm going to set it to pause.fill and then otherwise, so using the colon, it's going to be play. So what this means is that when I tap on it, it's going to switch to pause, but otherwise it's going to be play. So by default. But here, notice that it's doing the transition for me. And this transition is all thanks to the SF symbol replace animation using the content transition modifier. Without this, it's simply going to change without animation. So that's the magic of it. Back to the SF Symbols app, you can actually test the replace animation. And here you can replace it with whatever name of the icon that you want to use. And it can be by layer or the whole symbol and the direction and so on. These are all available options in code as well. And you can preview that by seeing how it's going to animate. Now, one last thing before we go, I want to show that the SF symbols can have a size inconsistency. So for example, when I click this, you're noticing that we have a size change in the frame, and that's because of the size of the icon. To avoid that, and this is very typical in CSS as well, you want to set a bounding box, a frame for your icon. It's not going to exceed that, it's not going to be below that. And to do that, we're going to set dot frame using a width of 44. So now that we have set the frame that is going to be consistent, it's not going to change anymore the size of the container. And we can do the same in order to center everything. So for example, if this icon is taking less space horizontally, it's going to mess with the centering of the icon, especially the play one. So you can definitely copy this frame modifier and apply to the other icons as well. And you can see now it's well centered. So back to the bounce animation where we have the value change. This is where we can set the state is tapped instead, because this is triggered when we tap on the icon. Every time that we tap on it, it's going to trigger that bounce animation with a speed of 3 and repeat 3. And we can also apply multiple symbol effect modifiers. So for example, on top of the variable color animation, I can have an additional animation using symbol effect. And this time I'm going to use dot bounce as well with a value change is tapped. And so you're going to see that it's also going to bounce on top of the variable animation. As you can see, SF Symbol 5 is super powerful and convenient in code. Now, in the next section, I want to show you how to set a looping animation using states by using a timer. So for example, for this zoom scale up animation, and also we're going to set a state change for the screen itself. So for example, the container is going to change in size. And we're going to customize the animation timing by using the new options for Spring. So I'll see you in the next section.